And I will start with the roll call. So thank you all for making your time today morning. And Angie Minetti, yeah.
Here.
Okay. Greg Brown.
Here on the line.
Thanks, Greg. Angela Levin.
Here.
Nicole Wilkinson. Liz Ash. Wendy Brand.
I'm on the line. Good morning.
Good morning, Wendy. Myron Eng.
Here.
Michael Steele.
Here.
Carrie Bailey.
I'm here.
Thank you. Renee Wasserman. Kristen Power. Nicole Christmas.
Here.
Terry Thomas. Tom Myers. Holly Fromeni. Kristen Alston.
I'm here on the line.
Thanks, Kristen. Scott Reich.
Here.
John Benton.
Here.
Thank you. Gavin Pendleton.
On the line.
Thank you, Gavin. Rick Rausch.
Here.
Jake Cross. It's not here. Megan Cambridge. Is here. Monica Wagner. Ron Pillarin.
On the line.
Thanks, Ron. Tommy Asu.
Here.
Thank you. Bob Fuji. Nicholas Oliver. Drew Lausch.
Online.
Thank you, Drew. Brian Nizer. Is Brian with you, Drew? Kristen.
Brian, I think I'm going to be the only one from EPA headquarters.
Okay, thank you, Drew.
Yep.
John. Okay, John. Ed Ochoa.
He's not here today.
Okay. Margarita Padilla. David Irie.
On the line.
Thank you, David. William Fallon.
On the line.
Thank you. Rachel Wagner. Paige Broco. Heather Tanner.
Here, Nina.
Thank you, Heather. Romina Shais. Sherbu. Michelle Henry.
I'm here on the line.
Thanks, Michelle. Larry is here.
Here.
Brittany Atkins. Andrea Ventura. Heidi Sanborn. Edward Moreno. Carlos Gutierrez. Right. With that, thank you very much. And we'll start with the first agenda item for a legislative update on AB 514. Angie? All right. Thank you, Angie.
Hi. So the bill will be heard in appropriations. I don't think they've started hearing it because they're still working on the fiscal analysis. Obviously, May 17th is one of, which is next week, is one of the last scheduled hearings for the Assembly Appropriations Committee. So I think, obviously staff is trying to assess what the fiscal impacts of removing personal care products from the Medical Waste Management Act would be. So I think we're still waiting to see what those estimates are. I hear that there may be a tentative hearing on May 24th so that any bills that haven't been resolved or roll over can still be heard on that day. Granted, if the analysis shows that it may cost the state over $150,000 to either enforce the measure or maybe there are some related fiscal costs, the bill will be put on the suspense file, at which point I think the Appropriations Committee and the chairwoman with leadership will determine which bills they would like to leave the committee with whatever, in totality, whatever assessed impact on the state would be absorbable. So kind of a little bit of a waiting game here. Sure.
Have you heard anything that there's a cost associated with the bill?
Well, the bill is tagged fiscal, and so usually when it is, obviously it doesn't require an appropriation to carry out the measure, but there could be some type of fiscal effects on the agencies that oversee the jurisdiction of that statute. So, potentially some from DTSC if there are products that, are now out of medical waste management, but then now managed as hazardous waste. And so there could be some enforcement costs associated with that. And I'm sure that folks from DPH and DTSC can maybe speak a little bit more to that, but
Could you?
I'm not sure what that.
Like I said, other than conceptually, like I said, moving stuff out of the Medical Waste Management Act would potentially move some stuff into hazardous waste control. Whether or not we ourselves would tasked with or hit with any fiscal impacts, I'm not foreseeing significant amount, simply because, most of this would be, the impact would be felt, if anywhere, at the Coupa level, where depending on, it will move, whether the same entity at the local level oversees somebody managing stuff under medical waste versus hazardous waste. So there's going to be some moving of universes, moving of jurisdictional oversight, but for the most part, I'm not anticipating a specific fiscal from this in this movement.
There might be a positive impact in terms of increased taxes, disposal fees, and so forth that flow to the department.
Yeah, possibly. Like I said,
It's not going to be much.
I don't know that I have enough information to really kind of map it out to that level of detail.
So,
It's difficult to hear on the line. Yeah.
well, there you go.
Thank you.
That's not a microphone. You just held up your phone.
No.
My question was just sort of who weighs in on that then? It doesn't sound like you guys have been asked. So does the committee itself do that analysis?
There's a couple of different avenues that information comes in through, but Department of Finance, on behalf of all state agencies, will provide an estimate of fiscal impact to the committee. And their impact assessment is based upon, in part, feedback that they receive from the state agencies that they contact.
Okay. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask if Ron, if you had any other thoughts on this. Ron Pillarin.
I don't. I kind of agree with what Rick is saying.
Okay, great.
And then what's after appropriations?
The assembly floor.
Full floor. Yeah.
So the deadline for that is June 2nd, so it'll have to pass out of the assembly by June 2nd.
And it needs to be out of Appropriations Committee by May 26th. So that day, all bills that are on the suspense file. So if, let's say next week it's set for agenda and they have all the fiscal estimates from the agencies and they determine that it doesn't have a cost, AB 514 doesn't have a cost beyond $150K to the state, then it can proceed to the floor. If it does, then it's held in appropriations and put on the suspense file, at which point that hearing takes place on May 26th for both houses, the Senate and the Assembly, and then they'll determine which bills they would like to let out of the fiscal committee based on their costs to the state or other political reasons that are unbeknownst to many.
Nobody will know what happens.
Laws and sausages.
Yeah.
Is there a chance that it would not be heard, that they won't make any kind of determination on costs?
I think if there is no determination on cost, then the analysis would just say, minor or minimal fiscal cost to the state, and it may not even have a number attributed to it. So, but because it is still tagged as fiscal, it needs to go through the process and have the hearing, and have the analysis reflect that it doesn't have a fiscal cost to the state.
So it would get looked at regardless?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where we're at. We're still accepting support letters.
I assume there haven't been any negative letters.
No.
Yeah, we haven't heard any more in terms of opposition or anything.
Just a quick announcement for our meeting. If you have any questions, just send it to Matthew with one T. You want to say that?
It's Matthew, Mathew .evans@dtsc.ca.gov. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, that helps facilitate if trying to break into a conversation, so we know that someone on the line would like to speak. So that would be the importance of that. Helps a little bit of facilitating that. Okay.
And one more thing, my apologies. I also want to know who all are in this meeting that I missed during my roll call. I did see some people into the room walk in after the roll call, so I've added them. But if I've missed somebody online, feel free to let me know.
You also have Matt Williamson and Chris Hennessy for Rite Aid again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Then we move on to the third item on our agenda. And I made copies of the report that we sent out yesterday, that Megan sent out to some of you, and then I think Michael forwarded to some others too. But we have it on our flash drive here, right? And we're going to put it up right now. Oh, would it be available? Is it available on?
Yeah, ask them also, everyone can speak close to the mic or speak up a little bit. Still having trouble hearing online.
Okay. We request that everyone speak to the mic so that everyone online can hear. And so Matt is going to put up that report on our screen here, and we'll move on to discuss that. Megan?
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. I really appreciate the help that we've been getting through the months on the surplus household consumer product waste report to the legislature. Again, this is still in very rough form, draft, still conceptually looking at the formatting of it. I had some ideas, and I briefly spoke to a few that have been primary authors of this regarding looking at being able to concisely manage some of the information and take advantage of the wonderful work you have done on the problem statements, and maybe having the problem statements be the detailed portion of how we came up with a concise statement. So some of formatting purpose, I was thinking we might want to focus it a little bit more. Let me open that up first, because I know, Michael, you and I briefly spoke about that again, conceptually, how does that work? So that would come possibly on page, oh boy, that would be possibly on page 10. And I titled it, and again, this is conceptually, many of you did not receive this document last night. I sent it out more of to key authors just to see if this was even a viable approach before I sent it out to everyone else. So my apologies if anyone's feelings got hurt because they didn't get a copy of it last night. But now that I think everybody should have a copy of it now. Again, it's rough. Rick didn't even have a chance to look at what I've done, so I feel we'll get some feedback as well from Rick on this. So I'm open to that as well. But I wanted to get something out so that we could take advantage of some concepts of how we might want to reorganize it. My thought, as I put this over here, is to kind of look at what we're really speaking about on page 10 is the management of waste from retail operations. So we're really just focused on those portions that are not the broken, leaking. I mean, all those things, I think we all realize that those are hazardous waste, but how do we delegate to looking at just the waste and determining whether they're hazardous waste or not? Early in our process, we had some flow charts. Some of you may have remembered. I think that might help a little bit to express what are we really talking about here. So we had some flow charts on, sales, product, it goes from product to retailer to consumers. And then we had another flow chart that really talked about the receiving, tracking, storage, distribution, things that facilitate the reverse distribution and why that's of value. Only to, again, give it context. let me just throw that one out before we go on to some of the other issues that came up. Please, Scott.
Yeah, so is the suggestion that we basically include upfront kind of a narrative description of like the flow chart?
Well, yeah, I think the idea here is let's give this whole issue context. So that we understand. It's similar to the way EPA has described some of their findings that Drew has put together in terms of kind of the retail waste management picture that then gives the rest of this discussion some measure of context for understanding.
But it's a description of how things move through the process.
Yeah.
I think that's fine. It's a good suggestion.
Is now joining.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a good idea, Megan.
Okay.
So obviously the art will be capturing it in language that, again, tries to reflect a consensus of views that doesn't go in any particular direction too far, but it's trying to objectively state factual information without any getting into the underlying weeds of controversy or concern.
Well, and I think the EPA flowchart is a consensus document. So yes, there could be some different views, but I think it's a good idea to reference that. And thank you. I got one.
Yeah, you need to.
I need to. They're laughing because they're giving me 2 mics. Apparently, I'm too quiet. It's the first time I've ever heard that. Great. So that's an insertion? Is there?
That would be an insertion, and I'm calling it on page 10, 3.1, overview of the retail process. So again, just to get some context to what we're talking about, that's where we do the flow charts and do a little narrative how things flow.
Again, Megan, I think the only suggestion I would have in terms of titling and focusing the scope of this.
Yeah, sure.
Because there are many things that are managed as wastes from this system. Suggests that because 423 really does focuses on the management of surplus products.
Okay.
That we should try to limit our scope there because that the tentacles of other things, can get very distracting. And I think as long as we can focus and make sure that we're focused on the topic that we were charged with focusing on, other issues, such as the empty container discussion or other testing requirements and those sorts of things, like they're related. And I think yes, it's important for them to have some linkage to this context, but the clear focus of us that we were supposed to have is surplus products and how those are being managed.
Certainly, when you're talking about donations, they are not a waste. So I think that's a really great suggestion.
Well, also, we're not talking about the entire universe of waste like cardboard or plastic or used hangers.
Yeah, great suggestion. Thank you. Why didn't I think of it?
Okay.
You meant that. You just failed to put it on paper. That's all.
Well, the other thing, actually, as we go through this, that
is now exiting.
In addition to your comments, I think we had submitted a draft before the last meeting, and then we updated it to reflect the conversation at the last meeting. So I think as we go through, we'd certainly welcome comments on not just the red line, but the underlying text.
The underline.
I think
underline.
The underlying but not underlined text.
So,
just to be right, because I don't think we've had a full discussion of that either.
No.
So I just want to make sure people.
Or within the problem statements
Yeah.
themselves. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the recommendations, the whole
or
thing.
The contextual information that was included with the problem statement. So
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah, I just want to make sure that people are not focusing only on the red line. If there are other things, we have 2 weeks, so now's the time.
Yeah, you got it. So first, I wanted to ask how
is now joining
how the group felt about, because to me it appeared as though the problem statements didn't give a consensus of the issue at hand, and that to have a more concise statement so that the legislature, whoever was reading the report, would have a better feel for all the issues in a united form rather than going through each one. I don't want to get rid of the problem statements. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I'm thinking the to have more of a description right here as we talk about the management. Maybe Rick, this was kind of your concept as well, right?
Right. Yeah. No. So some of this does reflect conversations that Megan and I had on the plane flight and another earlier this week. But the idea is, I think, as was reflected in our conversation and discussion in the last meeting, this concept and challenge of reaching consensus around some of these topics becomes somewhat a challenge of either small or significant proportion, depending upon who's kind of weighing in on it, or at this point potentially not weighing in on it. So one of the thoughts was, if we can kind of distill down to its very essential elements of what the problem is within the document. Again, context is where I think we were hitting snags in terms of whether there was understanding or agreement as to why positions were being held and whether and how that information weighed into that positioning. So how law is interpreted, how it should be interpreted, how everything, so it's like the challenge is, and I think from my perspective, as I was kind of listening to the various discussion, the issue itself was that there wasn't agreement around what the issue, how those legal terms and conditions and provisions came to play. And because of that uncertainty, it was leaving us in this challenge of, decision making, conservative or otherwise, in terms of how these materials would be managed. So the very essence of the problem is it's not clear. And there are different positions out there in terms of how it should or shouldn't, and that lack of clarity and that lack of certainty is leading to the behavior and the what we're seeing in terms of management of materials or lack of management in certain ways that we might feel beneficial. So what we're thinking is, can we distill these down to a very distinct core of what the problem is? I.e., for instance, for donations, lack of clarity is resulting in more material being wasted as opposed to being put into continued use as a product. And that becomes, in essence, the core of the problem. And we don't have to agree why each person believes what they believe or why it necessarily has come to that, because I think there are very legitimate arguments to be made on all sides of that issue. But I think the result of it all is that is the problem. That there are various viewpoints, it's very difficult to winnow the fact pattern that might come in various forms and fashions within any of these particular discussions. Facts mean everything, and so individual circumstances are going to play out. So trying to capture this in a general context where facts are going to be very key, it's that balance point. Does that make sense? No.
Well, we heard some of this in the last round, and we tried to, when we made revisions, reflect in the problem statements where this was a retailer view of things or was what we thought was just generally accepted as being factually correct. So I hope we've made significant progress in reducing controversy over what the problem is, and appreciated that the markup that you provided didn't really mess with that part of the analysis. I understood when we spoke that it would be useful to have this sort of abbreviated statement up front, and that makes sense to me. If I'm a legislator and I'm reading, I really want sort of more of an executive summary as to, okay, what are these people, what's their issue, and how are they proposing to deal with it? To some extent, we do that at the end of the document when we get to the summary of the problem and the recommendations. Whether we need to create a new section that sort of summarizes the end at the beginning, or just move the end to the beginning, those are things we might consider. And I don't have any problem with organizing it in a way that makes it more effective, and I thought your ideas were good ones. To, what's the best way to communicate this? The art of drafting up the summary of how retailing works, that I don't think should be an insurmountable challenge. We've got a good head start on that because we did that very early on in the process. Right. Yeah, so we can dig that up. And then this section that sort of summarizes, here are the issues in 1 or 2 sentences, as Rick just did. I think that's great.
So one thought, and thank you for that. So one thought that I had in here was just a statement, this page 11, that really talks about this. It kind of excludes the broken, leaking, and other things that we know that are unfit for resale. Just to let the reader understand what we're talking about, or those that are of question, whether or not it falls within, because I just wanted to give it again some context. We're not talking about the retailer who knows they have to dispose of it, because I think we had consensus, that was the consensus that we had within our meetings here, so.
Yeah, that's, you're talking about the second paragraph
Yeah, it's the
on
second
page
paragraph.
11.
And then I had some ideas about whether or not we wanted to have some brief discussions. Again, I'm just throwing these out. I said, like, discussion on the point of generation, when a product is discarded. However, that is going to be probably one that has to be crafted very carefully.
Well, Megan, I think.
And we do. Thanks, Scott. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that's all fine. I mean, I think, as we've explained this, to other people, we always talk about there's two kind of categories of issues. When is it a waste, and what kind of waste it is? I think that kind of, if that's what you're talking about,
yes, I am.
I think setting that stage, and then it'll flow nicely when we get to the substance. Okay, these are a couple of the point of generation issues. Yeah. These issues implicate what kind of waste it is.
Yeah.
I think setting it up that way, makes a lot of sense. Sorry to interrupt, but I think where I'm still not confused, what happens to the problem statements? Do we keep them and move them, or what's your suggestion there? That's part I'm
I
not
had some thoughts. I'm not so sure I want them to go into an appendix per se, but they are resource documents. Whether we keep them within the document itself or put it in as appendix, I'm fine anyway. I just felt the document was missing this.
Yeah, it's missing some context, and I think an executive summary is a really good idea when you're talking about the audience that we're talking about. Those are both great. I wouldn't want to lose all the work we put into the problem statements. I do think there is, in addition to the summary, there is some benefit to the legislature to see that this group actually really dug into things and those sorts of things. So I want
now
that to
exiting.
be. I guess I sort of prefer them in the report. If people want them in appendix, I'm not going to complain about that, as long as we don't lose them.
And as long as we've done that careful balance of attribution, or consensus to the extent that there is that. And I realize
we did really try hard at that, and honestly, we can't. Others will have to say whether we did it effectively.
Right.
or whether they want to distance them. And again, it really is. It is incumbent upon everybody who's participating, who is considered to be part of this working group, as to whether or not they feel comfortable having their name or organization associated with the body of this information or not. Because I think that we're also willing to consider that we have members of the working group, and then there are others who have just been monitoring the ongoings, and therefore we're willing to put two different categories of entities, so that my general feelings, I want to make sure that those who read this report understand who all's been involved in this conversation, whether as members of the working group or whether just simply as interested parties who have been willing to share.
And I'll take that as a cue. This is Larry Sweetser for those on the line. One of the things I'd like to see in there is this whole issue in terms of context. It's not just a retailer issue. It affects the local government side significantly, one way or another, no matter how things go. In terms of the report, with all respect to the retail industry, they're not the most sympathetic person out there to the general public, but they need to know how it impacts them. It impacts them from a hazardous waste standpoint on paying for the collection one way or another, either through the cost it costs the retailers to do it, that gets passed on. If we end up with a household hazardous waste program, we've got a cost there. If it's a solid waste issue, which many of those things are, we bear that burden, not only of the cost of managing it, that we have to pass on the rates, but also in terms of diversion efforts. And that I didn't see is focused on there. And I've been working on some of that in there, so I'll take the charge of coming up with that.
Yeah, Larry, on that point, I think it would be helpful as we look at all of the problem statements, that it needs to incorporate some of those ancillary or other impacts, which may not necessarily be in the core of some of these discussions, but to the extent that there are ways in which these things do have ripple or wave effects outside of the direct sphere of retailers and their operation, I think it's important to include that. So
Yes, I'll take that on. I've been working on something and talking to a few of my other folks.
as well as a contextual element. So like I said, I think it's important that the reader understands kind of where that local government or household hazardous waste piece fits in the realm of all of this, so that when the problem statements, you don't need to repeat it or somehow echo it.
Yeah, household and solid waste. It affects both.
So I'm glad that Scott brought up that issue because, a couple of things. One is, we are called the Retail Waste Working Group, and we have spent a significant amount of time developing the problem statements.
Yes.
And so I think, even in the flow chart, even though it may not be the core of what surplus is, it still is part of that retail process workflow in terms of what we have to do with some of these other items, whether it's, hazardous waste determination, point of generation, and so on. So, and I would be one to vote, I think, for it to be included in the report because, as Scott mentioned, I think that there is a lot of benefit of having that provided to the legislature, because I think at some point in time they need to be aware of the process overall of the things that are involved not only in surplus goods, but these other issues that definitely are touching upon the core processes that we're talking about. So I think it would be a loss if we didn't include that to have that discussion.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that we lose any of the good work that's been done. I think it is just kind of trying to organize it and get this communicating in a way that's helpful and meaningful to the audience or recipient
is now joining,
who may not necessarily be as have the time to engage to the level of depth and or have the legal degree or the daytime legal degree that I have.
Scott, before you jump in, we do have somebody on the phone who should be muting their phone for us. So, yeah, I'm hearing a lot of background noise. Sorry about that.
Oh, I was to Larry and others. I think that given the time frame that we're in, I think maybe before we leave today, we can talk about when we would get comments. And I would really encourage people to provide kind of track changes comments. Like I said, we've done our best to think of other people's points of view, but we're probably not as good at expressing your point of view as you are. And so if you could provide comments with actual wording that you would like to see, obviously we'll get wording from different people, so we might, some people will be commenting on the same thing. We won't be able to do it exactly with everybody's wording, but if we get that, I think that'll speed this along as opposed to us, getting a comment that says, please address, the concerns of whatever, and then, we're trying to figure out how to do that.
Scott, I agree. We're at a point where, like I said, we appreciate your attempts to channel other points of view, but there comes a point at which those with a point of view need to express the point of view. And if it's going to be in this document, those of you who are participating in the group have got to speak up or in somehow, some way, help us to put it into context. Because, again, to the extent that you were able to, Scott and Michael, kind of capture it, great. But I think we at least also need to hear that you feel satisfied or that it accurately represents. So we need some indication from the participants as to where they sit in this and the content of the document.
I don't know if this is a good example or not of what you're talking about, Rick, but, when I think about maybe one of those conflicts that come up, a retailer may feel like they're doing everything they're supposed to under the guidelines that they understand, and then you have an inspector who comes in and there may be a conflict there because they see something different. So that viewpoint is not really necessarily in here. How do you ensure that the retailer and those who are doing the audits or inspections are working off the same set of guidelines or understanding? And I thought that should be in this report as well, because that is somewhat of an issue and may have resulted in enforcement actions in the past, or the fear or of an enforcement action. I don't know if that's a good example.
Well, I think it does, Megan, bring up a good point, which is some of the historical context that has brought all of us together, at least over the past several years, maybe not through the 423 process, but prior to that. I think it would be important to lay out some of that historical context, because our relationship has been forged not necessarily, because we were drawn to each other, but because there was some measure through some of the settlements of compelling. There was a direction in some of the settlements to work together. So I think giving that previous effort some show in this to kind of indicate that this is not just coming from that piece of legislation, but it's been a kind of a progression of discussion and events. Because even that reflects, I think, in some ways, the fact that these issues are not easily dispatched. They're not easily understood and kind of dealt with or explained away or what have you. It's like the fact that it has taken this long to come to resolution, I think, is a testament to how difficult some of these issues in fact are. So I think that context would be helpful, not in great depth, but in some way to capture it so that it's reflective of the relationship over time.
Good, Jim.
Good.
Well, I was going to just ask if there are substantive points. I mean, everybody can go home and do their edits, but if there are substantive points that would benefit from a live in-person discussion, we're running out of opportunities to have those. So I would encourage people to raise them now, and let's see if we can
so
identify
that would take
positions.
us, I think, into the problem statements
Okay.
themselves.
One question, at least on all of them, are there recommendations that are embodied in any except for the one that I see, which is...
Well, actually, this starts the whole section on recommendations
Okay.
for all of them.
Okay.
Okay.
Fair enough. So, okay, I was a bit confused on at least the formatting. So if that's... There is a... Okay.
Yeah,
So I won't go further into that right now.
Yeah, we tried to take all the recommendations out of the problem statements, and the problem statements, the design is simply to provide some background. Here's, kind of how the lay of the land.
Right.
Why it's a problem, at least from our perspective, and then what the consequences of that problem are, the impact, practical impacts, but not to get into saying, so here's how to fix the problem. That's in the last section beginning at page 27, where we tried to kind of run through again all of the issues, and here is a possible resolution. And the little chart we put together is supposed to be, for visual thinkers like me, an easy way to kind of get a snapshot of how things kind of seem to sort themselves out.
Maybe this is the best place to spend our time this afternoon and this morning is looking at these recommendations.
Well,
again, we really haven't had a time.
I think back to Scott's point, unless there are some key issues or elements of the problem statements that people have, in reading them, have anything that they wanted to just ask questions about or express. So I think let's at least give that one quick round of discussion if needed, and then we can shift gears and focus on the recommendations.
Well, I did have one comment with regard to donations and salvage, and it had to do with the wording in the problem statement.
Which page?
This would be page 12. When it talks about some regulars have taken the position that, at least in some cases, I probably would like to see that articulated more about a general concern rather than just regulators.
But I don't know. I mean, I guess, Megan, I don't know that that's a universal concern, even among regulators. I mean, I've listened to Jay explain this multiple times, and I think Jay thinks it's what we're doing is perfectly fine as far as I can tell. So I don't know that all regulators, and I'm not certainly going to speak for all regulators. I don't want to speak for any of them, but I think
you might have a bit of a conflict of interest.
Yeah, because so I mean, I understand it's kind of a caveated sentence, but unfortunately, that's sort of the situation. We can't say all regulators are concerned about this. And I don't think that even the ones who are concerned about it are concerned about it in all cases. So I don't know.
It can be worded better.
Some have raised concerns that, if you want to say that.
So, not that I want to work the language out now, but I just thought maybe it could use just.
Well, you're more, I'm sure we can work that out. The comment at the end is sort of the more concerning comment for us. Because, which for those of you following along, it says this would depend on the facts known at the time the product was removed from the retailer. So, that's been the debate, right?
Sure.
What facts and known by whom? Or should have known. Or should have been known by whom, exactly. So, again, here I think in this paragraph, we're just trying to articulate what the problem is. And the problem is that sometimes things that look perfectly fine end up being thrown away. And so does that mean they were waste at the retail store or in the manufacturer's warehouse, or does that mean they became waste when they were thrown away? That's
right.
The problem.
But Scott, I think from my perspective, the problem in and of itself is that level of uncertainty. It's not the positions themselves that are taken rightly, wrongly, or what have you. It's just that because of the uncertainty, because in some cases it may be, and in other cases it may not be, that uncertainty drives the problem of wasting more than what would otherwise need to be wasted if there was clear path and certainty along those lines of what is or is not, where is the point of generation and all that. So, like I said, for me, as I look at this, the problem is not the positions that are taken. The problem is not that, in some instances, the facts play out that, maybe in fact it is waste and should be managed as waste. And in some instances, it never was waste and never should have. The issue is the uncertainty. The uncertainty is what's driving behavior, and the behavior is what's causing the consequence.
I understand that.
That's what the previous sentences in this problem statement say. So, we actually look at the whole thing as a whole.
Yeah.
As products that are shipped to a reverse logistics center, a small portion are disposed of. Those that are disposed of, a small percentage are hazardous or medical waste under California law. I don't think anybody disagrees about that. Such products may be disposed of by the reverse logistics facility for a variety of reasons, including X, Y, and Z. I don't think there's controversy over that's why things get disposed of. And then whether you say some regulators have taken a position or you simply say some concern has been expressed about is fine. That if such a product is returned to a reverse logistics facility and disposed of by the facility, the product should have been considered a waste by the supplier or retail management in accordance with hazardous and medical waste laws. I think that we captured that. I don't think we need to add anything more to it.
Well, I don't think I'd add a sentence that takes a position on who's right or wrong here.
Right. That's the problem.
But maybe if Rick wants a sentence that says these different decisions result in uncertainty, I will just say, as the person who got yelled at for using that word in a prior meeting, I hesitated to put it in here. But if you guys want it in, that's fine. We can add a sentence that says these different views create uncertainty that results in additional products being thrown away, or something like that.
Yeah, I don't recall. Was I the one yelling?
No.
Okay, good.
That person's on the phone right now.
At least my amnesia doesn't go that far back. So, okay. So, and I get it. Like I said, and I'm not quite sure what the context was for that feedback.
The concern was that there's some inherent criticism of the legislature when we say that there's uncertainty in the law. The legislature has spoken very clearly, and we all know what it means.
And so I guess my suggestion would be, as long as we hinge that uncertainty on application or certain the circumstances to which the law is applied, and not lay any judgment upon the law itself. I think that might be a way to distance ourselves from that particular criticism. And again, but I'm not going to argue, and I don't think anybody, that there isn't uncertainty that's driving this. That reticence or reluctance to go down that path, given some of the again, the history that we're gonna add to this, which is the prosecution of certain cases on retail waste have led us to this circumstance.
Okay.
It's just a little wordsmithing.
Yeah.
Appreciate you hearing us on that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, the only other question, as I look at that problem statement, it's like, when we say small portion or small percentage, it's like, it's gonna beg the question of, well, just a quantification, and I'm not sure we need to quantify, it's just, it strikes me just in that sense, it's like, okay, a reader is gonna say, well, what are you calling small portion? Would the reader agree in proportionality or assessment of size and scope of the issue? That's it. I mean, that's the only thing that this begs, that it doesn't speak to, and.
But it's really hard to get to
I get that.
place.
Yeah.
We have that survey that was done by one company of one facility, but I don't know that you'd say that that was statistically robust enough to quantify as scientific evidence. So small is kind of a relative term. Small in one person's mind may be medium in another's.
Well, we could do.
But if you take
relatively small.
Well, I mean, it depends which way you're going. You would take that out. I think we wanted some context.
Sure.
For how big this issue is, but we could just go with what we have, which is a footnote that says, for example, one facility estimates that it's less than X percent. I mean, it's single digit percentages here.
Yeah.
So that would provide some context for the comment and would address Michael's concern that we not overrepresent things that we don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my concern that somebody's going to ask for documentation or substance.
Well, and we talked about, Megan, earlier about maybe including some of the materials that have been submitted, including that PowerPoint as an appendix.
We have every intention to do that.
Okay, so it'll be in
Didn't
there
want to kill
some
you
as an
paper this time.
appendix. That's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
So we can
Just
drop a
reference
footnote
that
and reference that.
Say, qualifying it appropriately as not being, a survey of everything in the universe.
Okay.
But we have, I think on that point, we have
We have
what you put in
EPA,
your
NOTA
nota,
stuff,
we have what you put in our
right,
nota, we
right.
have your PowerPoint. There's 3 different sources that provide some context for what small means.
Right. So again, just making sure we have those documents that
And we can
either
reference
then
them.
reference and include as appendices or some other link.
And they're
to where it
remarkably
might be.
consistent.
They are remarkably consistent.
Imagine that.
Which,
Well, I mean, we
Well-
never talk to each other
Okay.
about this stuff.
Well, again, our strong assumption is that given that this system is operating in other states on a consistent basis, that you would have some measure of
Right.
information. And again, recognizing that each retail entity is not necessarily colluding and thereby avoiding any sort of
Right.
antitrust violations. The idea would be that data does exist somewhere.
Yeah. Good.
okay.
Anything else on problem statement?
Okay.
Yeah.
Larry?
I'll put comments in for the recycling one.
Okay.
It's still strange to me how it goes from solid waste 8939 doesn't quite capture the problem with.
That's fine.
I'm sorry, where are you looking?
Oh, on the recycling.
Page 24.
25?
Fair enough.
It morphs from the solid waste 8939 Integrated Waste Management Act into hazardous waste. And there's still a solid waste component.
Right, so the question becomes one of.
I've identified a few places to
Okay.
make those comments. I'll work with Nicholas on that.
Okay.
Okay.
Might have an interest.
Can we ask somebody, there's still somebody not muted. It's really kind of distracting. I can hear you typing, breathing. So if that maybe helps as to who it is, please do so. Thank you.
Cool.
Saying, okay, cool.
Okay, and any other feedback or comments on any of the particular problem statements? I guess the only other offering, kind of getting back to Myron's point, some of these, I think it's important for us to kind of set apart some of these overarching waste management issues as not necessarily being, I mean, there's some relationship to, but I think they have actually broader application or have broader impact than just the surplus products discussion. Because some of these, aquatic toxicity testing broadly applies across the base of all hazardous waste determinations, whether it's the broken and leaking, or whether it pertains to surplus products. So I think there is a broader application. So it's important to kind of provide some context so that it's not just limited to the surplus products discussion, for instance.
In other words, make that clear. Is that what we're saying?
Making it clear.
Okay.
So some of this may be that for the ones, those particular problem statements, we had some additional contextual information that kind of sets those up for presentation as they are. Because I mean, there are many things, like I said, I believe we even remotely touched on, which also, such as training, information availability, those sorts of things, which, again, there are many aspects of this issue that kind of can go on and on. But the idea of how you make a determination, who's qualified to make it, what sort of information is available, all have kind of resonated around this particular topic as well. And some of it does feed back into, again, not to be speaking on behalf of the retailers or their representatives, speaks into the problem statement, which is, or at least some of the recommendation for solution, which is the availability of this information, the training requirements for site staff, and the ability to ensure that they have that information available and to make legitimate determinations can be affected or benefited by your proposal to centralize the management of these materials. For instance, if I were speaking on behalf of the retailers, that might be an argument I would want to make. Or on behalf of any third-party entity that would be managing such materials. Not that I am.
Got it.
Okay, if the person online does not have a mute feature on their phone, you can try using *6 to mute it, and then *6 to unmute it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, what's next?
Okay. So any other questions, feedback on any of the problem statements? So again, Larry, you're going to be giving us some feedback on recycling?
Yeah.
Okay.
Need the better nexus.
I think in terms of the empty containers discussion, and I think to lose the term partially might be appropriate, because essentially a partially empty container clearly is something where I'm not sure we're going to have any sort of consensus on managing the residual materials in a container that's not empty. I think the issue is definition of empty.
I think we mostly got rid of that, except for maybe the title.
Okay.
Because that was a comment last time. We'll have to do we'll do a little
kind of a sweep
Control F for partially, but I think we mostly eradicated it.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of the problem statement on aquatic toxicity, the only other, the main arguments being offered are impact, obsolescence, and cost. Is there, I mean, I guess the only other question I would have for those who are offering this as a problem is there any additional substantive evidence of that oversubscription or overcharacterization that might be offered? And again, I'm just trying to think of it in terms of arguments that, we use a lot of old stuff. So anyway,
I'm not sure it's overly emphasized, but there always is the difference between the California and the Fed in explaining that to people. And I do remember that National Academy of Science study, which contrasted the two tests on the same product that showed that some things were actually failed the federal that didn't fail the California. And I don't remember the example.
Larry, I'm not sure. I don't think that was with respect to the aquatic test because
No.
beds don't have an aquatic. I think you may be referring to the wet test,
It was
waste
the
extraction
wet
test
test.
versus the TCLP.
Yes,
So yeah,
the wet test.
that's the solubility testing, and so, but I guess, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
So one of the issues was sort of the replicability of the test. I'm not sure which category that falls in, whether that's obsolescence, impact, or cost, but.
Or a new.
Yeah, maybe a new question.
And then there was the folks who won't do the test for animal welfare reasons.
I mean, I think that's fairly captured in here. Right?
The animal testing is captured?
I mean, at least what I just read it did. It
Yeah.
talked about it in 3 different sections, that the animal testing is part of the problem. That you've got it in 2 different sections, but it definitely.
Well, the only thing else I would say, and I don't know if Mandy's on the phone, but we heard a presentation, I think it was from someone at Procter & Gamble, who had some really good thoughts on aquatic toxicity. Maybe we can get them to read this and.
Yeah, I mean, actually, this looks like what the subgroup wrote for problem statements. It's verbatim. So I think we'll let our folks review it again, but this hadn't actually been approved by our folks.
But I think Rick has raised a question, which I think is a valid one, which is, do we have, and is this the appropriate place to put it, since we're just considering having further discussions, we're not reaching any conclusions on this one, but is there evidence that shows that this test does not represent, appropriately what the threat to the environment is? David Irie and Scott and I were on a panel together yesterday, and one of the things that David had said, and David's on the line, he can say it himself, but kind of interesting point that he made about this is a biological test, and biology is not always linear and reproducible the way that, testing for metals might be, and that, you're testing a different fish every time, and some fish might be stronger than others, I suppose. So it's an interesting question whether this actually gets to representing something that accurately reflects what the risk of this particular product to the environment is when disposed of. But I don't think we can get there in this document.
I think my only point is not necessarily that get resolved, but to the extent that there is some.
We could reference that that's an issue that needs to be, yeah.
The only other thing I don't see mentioned here is I know that there are other thresholds for aquatic toxicity or organism toxicity that are used in other regulatory systems that may also come to bear in this discussion. So the 500 milligrams per liter, for instance, that we use, other systems, to my recollection, use other threshold concentrations as being the relevant driver for highly toxic or other sorts of determiners instead of. So I think there's some indication from some bodies of work that 500 is a very stringent and very extremely protective level as opposed to 1,000 or other levels that might otherwise come to play.
I think, at least if there's consensus on this, it does make the recommendation, at least that DTSC will continue to work with the stakeholders on this. So maybe the subgroup will be continuing to work with the TSC to commence.
Granted, my only point, if I'm trying to make one, is that, and if I have one that I can actually articulate, is that obsolescence is not, yes, it's an argument how compelling it is, but that's difficult to assess because that's going to drive you deeper into and whether or not that, whether we truly understand and agree on obsolescence and whether or not the test is or is not. I think that's, again, it's a weaker, in my estimation, it's a weaker argument than some of these others might be. That's my only point.
Also debated the science. There's new science, there's new tests. So I mean, I don't know how if you want to change the articulate. There's other tests that the rest of the world is doing in other countries on new science that's more current. It's not just whether or not it's old, and because it's old, it's just there's new science.
Well, I think that's what Rick's saying is
right.
we should maybe articulate
highlight
that
those,
here.
and less on the age of this test and more on the advances in science and understanding.
We've had that in previous versions, so should that be, maybe that's something we'll just do in the next version and do more edits.
Yeah.
On that.
I think
And
that
then we
should be
talked
easy
about
to
the
do.
FBT test, I mean, the other
Right.
alternatives.
Right.
We can put it out, but I think the problem was other folks in our subgroup were not comfortable with referencing those alternatives. That was, we tried. In every version of that subgroup, if you guys go back and look, I mean, I was the editor.
Yeah.
They weren't comfortable with us referencing the alternative science that
Because you didn't want to
exists
get
today.
stuck with those too.
Because I mean, but we were just throwing out as just examples to evaluate. And so that
Reasons to revisit.
Exactly. So we can put them back in, but I think part of the problem was we had people that were demanding to take the references to new science out. But I'm
Okay,
definitely
well,
give
I
you
think the
references.
compromise we did in everything else was attribution is the solution to that. There are people who think.
There are people who think.
There are people who don't agree with that. I mean, as long as you.
But I also recognize that there is strategy and chessmanship in all of this, and you don't necessarily want to raise points that you don't want to have to answer to or have hung around your neck at some later point in a process. I get that too. And again, considering the subgroup, I don't believe, was there any governmental regulatory types in the subgroup?
No.
Okay.
I don't think we ever got there because this discussion got tabled pretty quickly on aquatic toxicity early on. But our subgroup met and did one conference call and a lot of edits, but then we never got any feedback from department and agency staff.
Yeah. So, you know, and honestly, I think for me, it's like as I look at this, the kind of the policy and the corporate prohibition on animal testing becomes the most, at least one of the most compelling arguments, which is that you can't test, therefore you're left with an assumption.
Right.
You must assume, likely conservatively, that it's hazardous because to actually run the test, you're going to have to violate your principles and practices.
And I think that's only one sentence in here, so maybe,
Maybe we
because I
can
agree
increase
that
that one
that's
too.
a bigger, and flesh it out a little bit more why it's complex.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not saying it's not all in here. Like I said, in my mind, I'm just trying to order it in terms of prominence of argument as opposed to some.
And we do say earlier in the document, one of the unique challenges for retail is the number of products and the number of new products.
Right.
And that might be a point to reiterate here. You know, where there's really good EPA statistics on, you know, some massive percentage of large quantity generators have, you know, 5 waste streams, and then you know, by the time you get to the top 75%, there's like 40 waste streams. Nobody has thousands of waste streams or thousands of products except for us. And so, you know, this is a place when we talk about cost that would put a little meat on that argument. I think that, well, it's not just we got 5 products and we don't want to run the test for 5 products. We got thousands of products that change all the time that would have to be retested all the time. And so I think that that's a kind of, you know, additional fleshing out that maybe would be helpful.
No, like I said, in the comment on the company prohibition on animal testing is kind of in the midst of the argument on expense and, you know, running it on 100 million consumer products. So I mean, you just have a lot built into that one paragraph that it might be. Like I just suggest looking back at it and evaluating whether or not there's a lot of strong arguments that are packaged very tightly and maybe would be benefited by unpacking.
Maybe we can cross-reference to a couple of company websites on the animal testing thing to give some heft to the argument as opposed to, you know, a sentence in the middle of a paragraph.
We could explain how many fish we would have to kill every year.
The millions of fish kill.
Yes.
Well, and just thinking out loud, and I know Andrea's not on the line, and I know she was part of the subgroup, but since we didn't really heavily vet this out in terms of this process, I don't know if there also needs to be sort of the counter argument, and that feeds into the recommendation that we didn't, you know, delve into this really high, but we've all acknowledged it's a problem. We're coming from very opposite ends of the spectrum on the problem, and that's why our recommendation is to
continue working.
Continue working.
I think we could say we didn't dive into it at all.
Right. No, no,
As a
acknowledge
larger
that we're
group.
both here, and hopefully in the process we can come
Right,
up with a
and,
new
and,
system.
and as I look at it in anticipation of what a legislature might do with this particular document on an issue which has not necessarily been fully vetted, their two options are to either say it hasn't been vetted enough, and so therefore we're just not gonna do anything with it, or seems like at least compelling enough to direct DTSC to do something. And if, in looking at it from the standpoint of the one who would be directed to do something, I'm just trying to give it some context within which to formulate the work and the work problem.
Just a caveat that the recommendation is not to necessarily ask the legislature at this time to direct
No,
DTSC.
I-
Okay, yeah.
I'm just saying, the recipient of this document is going to do something with it.
Yeah.
It's either read it and discard it, read it and consider it, read it and do something.
Right.
So the recipient, i.e. the legislature, is going to have those options. And whether they compel, whether they do, whether they act, that's beyond our scope.
But I guess, yeah, putting maybe DTSC in the bucket of a receiver of the document, and maybe they volunteer to do something without legislative direction, I guess is what.
And all my spare staff and resources were right on it.
No, I know.
Well, so what I hear from that is if you want it looked at, you might need a directive.
Right, and what we heard from, not
And
to
more-
get off topic, what we heard from the legislature was give DTSC the opportunity to get it, and if they decline, then go to the legislature, so that's a different discussion. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as I look at all of the various responsibilities, I have to do my prioritization of those things that are burning, screaming, dying, and begging for action.
And that's definitely that's a post-June, post-report conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, I just think my interest is in seeing it fairly represented so it doesn't get discounted as just the retailers just don't want to do something.
Yeah.
And it's just because it costs too much, or it's just
Right.
the impact of
I
it
agree.
is just something
Right.
they don't like. It puts you more into that realm of compelling technical arguments for discussing. And I'm working currently in this moment in time as I speak against my own self-interest of trying to limit my
I know.
demands.
I'm gonna hopefully get more work coming your way to evaluate this test. I will make it very compelling.
Tell us when the PCP process starts, so we'll.
Yeah, then you won't get the funding to evaluate the test, and that's a whole other thing.
There it is. There you go. The vicious cycle.
Are we to the recommendations?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I haven't even, I have to confess, I haven't even looked at the recycling one, and I know that recycling is never an easy topic in hazardous waste world. Probably difficult enough in the solid waste world, but just that whole recyclable material and retrograde material, all those are the fun arguments that come into play for recycling. And so we will definitely have a look at that and provide feedback.
Before we move on, Myron, give me some clarification here. I have this document in front of me regarding partially empty containers. Is this updated to what was in the document?
No, that actually is,
it needs to
obsolete. The one that's in the report.
Yeah.
Draft report, that's the more updated.
Okay.
one. So that one.
Excess, unnecessary.
Okay, so this is.
Surplus.
There you go.
Recyclable.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification there.
One other question on that one. We've got the pourable in there. Did we want to tackle the issue of solids in containers like roofing tar? One of my favorite ones.
That's not solid, it's just not.
Well, when it's dry.
Oh.
You can have roofing tar with that much stuff in it.
Yeah, but if it's got that much stuff, it's not dry, it's just got a nice hard crust around.
But where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
The 1 inch rule doesn't exist in California.
You're right, it's not. And that could be another one where, because our empty standards exist in regulation, the discussion or the desire to see it looked at by DTSC more specifically.
I think we can put something in there just to, as we're doing with something, just as, since it's not the core part, but we want to flesh out some of the things that are components of these other policy statements. I think it's just worth adding in there just as a general concern.
Yeah. What is nearly atmospheric?
All right, so in the recommendation section.
Yeah, I made one under the donations and salvage, and my comment isn't as significant as the trouble I'm having with the way the current information is. It says, and maybe it's my not understanding what is being said here, but it says until a final decision to discard is made, such products need to be shipped as hazardous waste. So if someone is transferring that decision-making because they have the opportunity to do that, rather than the requirement in the generator rules.
John Benton
they have
is now exiting.
time. This is where I'm a little concerned about this statement.
Well, I think when we get into the recommendations portion, I think it really is going to beg attribution specifically because, like I said, I think this is where who is offering it, and then the basis for it is really going to become clear.
Right, and so we had tried to address that by including after each section
you said
a provision that says no position or opposition.
Yeah.
So that people could, and people can express more than just an opposition saying, I oppose. They can say, I think actually it should work this way, or because a lot of this stuff is directed at the next phase, which is getting guidance or working together on the aquatic toxicity test or whatever it might be. And so to the extent that we can daylight what are the concerns, where do people diverge, that helps us to set up the agenda for the next set of discussions. So I didn't think that saying oppose or no position was a bad thing. I thought, let's go ahead and just get it all out on the table so we know where we stand. And that was the way to try to deal with that. I tried not to make these into advocacy statements more than I needed to, but we're sort of saying, well, so what needs to be done? We've outlined all these problems. We've outlined what the consequences are. How are we going to deal with this? And the chart breaks that out into what seemed to me to be the key issues, which were, the point of generation and then the application of the MWMA, supplements, and then the empty containers and aquatic toxicity. We're recommending that there be interpretive guidance on the point of generation. I think that's feasible. The Medical Waste Management Act, most of those issues are taken care of by 514, but there are a couple that are left over. Supplements, I think we've got a good resolution on that in terms of what everybody's understanding is. And then the empty containers and the aquatic toxicity, which needs reevaluation. So to the extent that when we get in a little more detail as to each of these, I think if there are divergences, let's get that in there. And
one thing that gave me heartburn was on the Medical Waste Management Act about managing OTCs as hazardous, because that's not reflected in the text as hazardous or solid waste.
Sorry, say it again, Larry.
Under the Medical Waste Management Act, the second box, the disposal of California only OTCs as hazardous. Even the text talks about hazardous or solid waste.
Yes.
Yeah, and so really it should be under the hazardous waste control law, which would mean managed as hazardous if hazardous and solid if not.
I want to keep that if in there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The other thing I was just going to add is
suggest it in the red line.
I'd like to hear DTSC's view on Michael's suggestion on the way we broke this out with options for opposing and just. I think we should be mindful of the fact that the charge to this group was to make recommendations. So I think we need to do that.
Yeah.
So taking that into account and recognizing that not everybody will agree on everything, I think it is incumbent on the people who have some other recommendation or oppose a recommendation to say that. But I don't think we can just avoid our responsibility that the legislature gave us to make recommendations. So that's what we're trying to balance is we have to make recommendations, but we understand not everyone will agree with everything. So how do you balance that? And the best way we came up with was to put down a recommendation and give people a chance to say they recommend something else.
And these are not particularly ambitious recommendations. If we get right down to it, we're saying, let's talk some more and resolve these issues. We've done a lot of work to isolate what those issues are. There seems to be a consensus that some sort of guidance on the point of generation issue is appropriate. That's basically all we say there. We suggest what our outline of the guidance ought to be. And if there are other points of view on that, that's fine. But if you look at the bottom box on resolution on the chart, they're all tough ones.
So I mean, I guess my only point is at least looking at your chart and the resolution box under all 4 of those categories of donation, salvage, recalls, credit, and recycling, is that you're advocating, or at least the recommendation is, that guidance would fix all of them.
Well, it's a good point, because credit probably doesn't get fixed by
I
guidance.
don't think credit, I mean, at least as I understand the consensus here, is that credit and recalls can't be fixed by guidance.
Right.
There's some people who think they can be, but I think that if you look for a consensus, it would be that if you're going to solve those, you need to get legislation.
Yeah,
That's
so
what I
maybe
think I heard.
the chart
So that
probably
probably
needs
the charges
another
probably did not get maybe updated to reflect that. I
Yeah.
think it's in the text.
Let me throw something out, and I don't know if this is going to work or not, but if it's a team that's making the recommendations, the way it currently sits, it does not reflect necessarily a team's position by asking if you approve or not approve. And I'm thinking there might be an opportunity for providing the various options that were discussed as recommendations, not that everyone agreed upon them, and where the consensus were for them. So it's kind of organizing it slightly different, so you don't know necessarily, because the way it works right now, it appears as though that it's written obviously by you guys. So
well, no, but I mean,
and maybe I'm just off base here, Rick. So
well, it's hard to know how to reflect until you guys say. I mean, look, if everybody says, yeah, we agree with the donation and piece, then it can be the recommendation of the group.
Yeah.
If it turns out that it's a close vote, then, would we get reflected differently? I mean, again, we do our best to channel, to use Rick's word, other people's views, but ultimately people have to speak for themselves, and it's a little hard to figure out how to present it till we hear from people.
That's on us a little bit there, so I appreciate that.
That's on the entire group.
Yeah, no, I think it is on. Well, the one thing I
will carry what I need to carry, but I will not carry.
Well, the other thing the last point I'll shut up for a bit is, I was a little nervous about this setup, frankly, because it had a chance for people to say no position. And I think if I would be very disappointed if a lot of the folks who participated in this process took that route. I don't think that's consistent with the charge we got from the legislature. So while we gave that option to people, and I understand that there may be people in a prosecutorial role who are not permitted to take that, to take a position, I hope that everybody who is permitted to take a position will take a position, because otherwise, we can give them a report that nobody signs on to, and it's not very meaningful.
Okay. Yeah. I had a question. Even though these recommendations and findings are directed towards the legislature in some ways, in your mind, do you consider regulation as part of that, or would you want that called out separately, that we would recommend a regulation to address that?
Yeah, I don't know that I would view this as the action is exclusive to the legislature. I think the legislature would be interested in knowing what can be administratively dealt with, as opposed to, and I think that reflects back on one of the statements you made about, figure out what DTSC is willing to do, and if they're not willing to do something, then come back to the legislature and talk.
Right.
So I think that the breadth of options or alternatives or recommendations, I think I would say I wouldn't restrict it to just legislative fixes, but I think they would be interested in knowing the totality of options that are on the table to consider.
I think they would be pleased to know that we had worked up these problems and determined that, in fact, for some of them, there is a non-legislative solution available. I think that's how grown-ups work, so.
Yeah, so I think they would be pleased to see that. I agree. I'm still grappling with the idea of having recommendation and opposition statements as opposed to, because I still haven't put it on and fully worn it and figured out how well that might work as opposed to alternative recommendations that kind of make the point of a difference of opinion without necessarily saying, yours is ugly.
And that's fine. I don't have an objection to the format. I was trying to accommodate what we were hearing in some of the meetings a couple of times back, where there are some views that are simply not in agreement with this, and I want to provide a vehicle for that. And so I think your solution, Rick, of an alternative statement as opposed to something as blunt edged as, I sometimes go for the blunt tool, and I appreciate something more elegant, such as an alternative approach,
So I agree. I like that idea because my concern with having no position was going to be you have to have support too, because I don't think we can take for granted that people understand who are supportive of it. So
you would have to, and then.
But so I'm going to not say that, even though I already did, and appreciate Rick's suggestion with a big caveat that will anyone write those alternative?
Well, again, I mean, those who have an alternative, who don't agree that the solution being offered resolves, fixes, or otherwise provides a pathway, are going to be obligated to come up with an alternative to consider. And I guess some of those alternatives could be, that they feel that current law works just fine, and that it provides the level of protection and environmental and public health protections that that California has designed its system to provide. I'm not advocating. I'm just saying that it could in fact be that those are some alternatives to consider. But again, come out and have. I think I tend to try to avoid that particular confrontational sort of approach in this, but that's just, like I said, that's me, and I'm still trying to grapple with how we can do this in a way that respects the perspectives and provides a format and a forum for people to express how this could be resolved. Is again, assuming for a moment that we all agree that the problem that has been expressed is a problem, and some of these recommendations could also say that we don't agree that there's a problem. We don't agree that this is an issue that needs resolution. For instance, we got a diverse group, and we've had a number of silent partners, and so I'm just trying to figure out here, how do we make sure that anything that's in this for which a person or an entity's name is on this document doesn't misrepresent, overrepresent, or mischaracterize. That's the challenge, and that some of this is we're getting to a point where people have got to step up and either separate themselves from the working group, so that we don't necessarily have to be too concerned about misrepresentation of views that people weren't able to or willing to put into the document, or alternately, come in and make sure that their views are adequately represented.
Yeah, I suppose that is another solution. I noticed Megan had added a list of participants, and maybe somebody decides, I don't want to be on the list.
I monitored this process, and provided input, but they're not a work group member. That's fine. Again, we've had a lot of people, that have participated in this process, and we appreciate everybody's the attention of everybody. But like I said, there are a number of viewpoints that I know we have not heard or seen represented or placed into the document. So, and now is the time to make it clear. Does this represent your views or not? And if it doesn't, what do we need to do?
Right.
Good. Well, so maybe diving in a little bit more, since we've got another 20 minutes, half an hour. Sure. If there are other comments on the recommendation section.
And I certainly don't want to go over my wordsmithing portion of it. I don't think that's valuable for this particular time. Although there are an awful lot of shoulds in here. DTSC should, which, as you look at options, alternatives, it could be.
Things like the could.
Well, it's a recommendation. I mean, I don't know what's the right word.
I don't
So
know,
I
does,
should.
can we kind of, it just doesn't sit
She's
right.
trying it on, and it's not
Okay.
fitting well.
Has agreed
So that's
to?
what I'm asking.
It's a
What
little
was-
baggy.
He's really doing it.
Well, we didn't want anything too tight fitting, but.
Understood. But I know we can work out some language on that. I just, when I read it, it was kind of a reaction, oh my gosh, you know.
Okay, well,
Will?
again.
I mean, if you're willing to do it, right? I mean, if that's the consensus of the group, that's the pathway we're going down.
Well,
Is it
I don't
more
know.
active even than should?
Well, I'm just thinking, if we're looking at alternatives, here's one alternative, you know, that DTS, it's not a necessarily linked to DTSC either. If it's a regulatory body or you're dealing more with rules, regulations, guidance, that would be more than just DTSC too. Maybe that's kind of my reaction is, are we looking at it broadly enough?
Well, who else would
Yeah.
be the regulator here that would issue
For
guidance on this
donations.
topic?
As far as guidance goes?
Guidance on this topic, which is
Yeah.
donations
Well,
of
we would work,
products when they become.
we probably would work with our sister agencies as well.
But
maybe,
again, if
maybe Krupa's or other things, but it
If it's hazardous waste, I think
It's, yeah.
I don't necessarily think that it falls far from here.
doesn't fall right.
Okay. Well, you can consult with whoever you want, you know, of course. I think, yeah. Well,
Scott, I just want to be clear. This is Michelle. The Koopas will not be issuing guidance. That would come from DTSC.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
But Michelle, I
answers
hope we can count on you to work with us in the event of that, and I know we can.
Absolutely, but I just don't want that misrepresented in this group that guidance comes from Koopas. We absolutely would work with DTSC.
oh,
but
I didn't,
it
that
doesn't come from
that
us.
wasn't me who said that, by the way.
That was Rick. It was Rick, and I know Michelle. I know we'll work together on it, so that'll be fine.
Good.
Okay,
We
it's
will
just,
work together. I think we got a will.
We got a will.
So it's no longer should, it's will.
But no, we will work together on whatever
If we
that
work
is.
together.
If we have to work together.
I mean, we could say something like the group recommends that DTSC issue
you know,
guidance.
even that fits a little bit
Is that better?
That does fit better.
Okay.
Can I? look
I
at-
just want to get the recommendation word in there somewhere, since it's a
Are we clear
recommendation
that
section.
that DTSC has the authority to, if they so chose, I mean, I'm not trying to water it down, but I think the point is we've captured, or we've agreed that you have the authority and you don't necessarily need to go back to the legislature, where on the other topics, we've agreed you don't have the statutory authority,
Well-
and you need to go back as well.
I don't think we've agreed to that, but we understand that.
Or we've settled on, that's the only
Yeah.
way it's gonna happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think our last discussion, we agreed that there were at least some scenarios that did exist where the facts aligned with this material not being considered a waste.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a sliver, and so I think
What's the sliver?
we can work with that. But that said, in some ways, it's like that. The challenge of identifying that sliver of land to take and own, and how that is defined within whatever guidance, and how helpful that guidance is in that narrow view, as opposed to, as I understand it, a desire for a bigger sort of look at this. So I mean, I think the guidance will potentially get so far, but I don't know, as I've been participating with you guys for many years now, that that's necessarily going to be as broad a fix as I think you are looking for to give you the management tools for this material that you desire. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Or did
I
I
think
just
it's, no, I think it's a
confuse-
fair statement, because we've said it, I don't think, this is what we're talking about. I don't think the agency is prepared to just resolve the credit issue the way we want it resolved with guidance. So therefore.
No, I was thinking more along the recalls and donations. Credit is completely another
Well, recalls
story
even.
entirely.
Yeah, well, recalls even, I think, what I heard in the room when we talked about it many times was that there are people who view the statute as not allowing the agency to recognize recalls or not, can be managed by reverse distribution. And if we need legislation to say that, then,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think that, but I'm listening to what I hear you say, and I hear people saying there's a statutory issue.
Right, well, and again, I mean, the recommendations can come in the form of, rather than forcing or compelling the different sides of this argument to resolve it through informal means. And one way through this is to come up with an approach which, is embodied in statute that allows for this or endorses this particular pathway so that, you're not compelling somebody to compromise or feel as though they're compromising on a strongly held position.
Right.
I mean, that would be my...
Is now exiting.
Yes, could you, hey, another 6 years, we can come up with, and whittle out some guidance on something, but I don't know I know that's not where I want to be, and I can strongly suspect that's not where you want to be. So the question is, in terms of recommendations, what's the best use of our time and approach to get to a resolution to get us where we need to be? So recommendations don't necessarily need, their form and format and function can be different, and I think have to be formulated from a variety of perspectives.
So on the key issue of the donations and salvage, I think there's a strong consensus as to what the solution is and that guidance is appropriate. So
for most issues. Like
yeah,
I said, I think
we can only address what we address.
No, right. But I think that as came out in the last discussion, it's like I think there is still a recognition, or at least there was a statement made that there are some fact patterns which may not necessarily give you that free and clear. So that leaves still uncertain for you, I think, what you would like to be made certain.
I'll feel great if we get,
you get that
guidance
piece,
that, that we've been talking about. And yes, there's always unanticipated factual scenarios that won't fit within the guidance or won't be addressed by the guidance. And that's, that's the way the world works. I thought Jay did a great job of kind of bringing to the head how the law applies in these circumstances. And so I'm confident that we can get there. On the recalls and credit, I think that on recalls, there was a lot of sympathy for the position that we were promoting, but there was concern that the statute doesn't allow it and that we need a legislative solution, so be it. Credit, I think there's a little more of a divergence, and we'll have to work on that in terms of the legislative fix. But...
Right, and again, as I look at it, like I said, we for purposes of discussion, separated these into separate issues. However, I don't necessarily believe that they need to be resolved individually or separately either. I think that there may be holistic solutions that address all of them simultaneously that could be offered.
Such as the original SB 423.
Well, or at
least
that concept. Which
is so what you're saying is
authorization for this material to be managed in a way that addresses all four of those things in a way that.
I see where you're going. Yeah.
So again, the difficulty in the approach we took in teasing these particular separate issues apart was to better understand each of them and how they operate, but that doesn't necessarily mean the solutions need to stay in those same compartments. Because I think those individual compartments, they may end up tripping over each other when you try to lay them side by side, but separately, as opposed to something which may deal with all of them in the same way through one particular approach. And again, yes, am I thinking that your original purpose in trying to pursue 423 was to get to a holistic solution? Yes. We would be foolish to not at least acknowledge that was one of the original elements of this whole discussion. So the question is, has all of this and all of our fine discussion over the past 5-6 months, has it led us back to anything that can speak to that particular issue and be useful for that particular goal? And I would say that if you're not trying to make that play, I don't know why not. And if you are, then like I said, let's think about how this document can at least be formatted to help set it up in that way. I'm not necessarily saying I'm advocating for it. I'm just saying that if that's one of the goals here that you were hoping to accomplish, I would expect the document to reflect that in some form or fashion. Does that make sense?
And ask for more.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it would be very easy, I think separating it out, was I think a necessary way to approach this. But yes, you could easily add a Romanet 1 and 2 back and deal with donation and liquidation in the same paragraph that you dealt with credit and recall. And that would be that is where we started, and the only reason to separate them out is because of the level of consensus that that we reached on one was sort of greater than the other. But there would be some benefit to having it all in one place.
Because again, that holistic approach gets you even that portion of any of these which may not necessarily be resolvable through guidance.
And what we could do, Michael, in the document is just say, you know, an alternative would be if we end up pursuing the legislation for C and D is to deal with this in the legislation too.
But,
I guess our concern is, you know, and this needs to be said at some point in this meeting, is there's, you know, we've been at this a long time. And there is, I think, I'm not overstating it to say that there is a declining appetite for spending time doing this for another couple of years. I don't think it's just my client that feels that way. I mean, at some point we have to say, and the people under settlements have to say, hey, we gave this a really good try. But it's, you know, there's a bottom to the pit here.
Is that a consensus statement?
Well, I think there might be. I mean, I don't know. Other people will have to speak. But
let's start at that base.
But I mean, we gotta, you know,
we're tired. We're done.
You know, we gotta shit or get off the pot here. I mean, sorry, but that's what we gotta do.
Could have been another one. Could be.
Wait a minute. Against animal testing.
I was avoiding the fish, but no, I mean, I don't. That was maybe off color. But look, there's just got to be an end here. There's got to be an end.
I don't think there's any disagreement. I'd like to say my hope is that this process gets us to at least an end point of this process. Now, whether or not it yields for you what you're looking, hoping to get, I can't tell you. But again, we've signed up with you to walk this path with you for many years now. So I think so. I'm not unsympathetic to your statement of frustration and concern and desire to end the talking and get us to a point of resolution and moving. Not unsympathetic whatsoever.
So on that note, we have 15 minutes left. Could we spend a little bit of time giving people real deadlines for providing comments? And
as we do that.
Can we I want just one comment on this concept of the legislation. I think the way we've teased it out now, we've got stuff that can be done by guidance, stuff that requires legislation. And we've committed to talk more on the guidance stuff and reduce it to writing. To me, that has the advantage of something that can produce a work product that much sooner than going through legislation. If the outcome of discussions about the guidance is, look, you want this other stuff in legislation, why don't we just put this guidance into the legislation and get it done, and we're going to agree to that and move it through quickly, you know, that's okay. And we should outline that as an alternative, but I don't want to lose the opportunity for something that, as I've said for many, many months now, I would like to be able to report success. And success on the donation and salvage issue would be a major accomplishment as far as I'm concerned. Eliminating the doubt over that. Stopping the situation where you have companies that refuse to donate in California, which is just crazy in a state with so much need that we have people who are afraid to donate to disadvantaged communities is just nonsense. So I actually believe in this cause that we've been fighting over, and I want to have it resolved. And guidance is the sure and quick way to get there. I don't think it's controversial. Global resolution through legislation would be great. We tried that. We ran into a lot of opposition. So let's get the things we can get and keep working on the things we can.
Before you go on that, I had a question on your solution for guidance explaining recycling. What were you looking at? Maybe you can explain that a little bit.
Yeah, well, we haven't actually discussed recycling substantively, right, at all. But my expectation from the discussions that we had on other issues is a presumption that would end up in the bucket with recalls and credit, and would also require legislation.
Okay, So not necessarily, not on guidance.
Yeah, we talked about the table not necessarily being accurately reflecting.
Right. I would love to hear differently.
But so in page 31 of 5.7, you're saying that retailers should be able to direct products that are capable of being recycled to reverse distributors who will determine whether recycling is feasible.
Right. So, so that goes back to the fact that all of these recommendations in here right now go back to the table as it stands right now. And the feedback we're hearing is that, right, recalls and credit would need to go through legislation. I mean, if everybody agrees that recycling can be done through guidance, that's great. But we just haven't talked about it. So we certainly welcome feedback.
I think the challenge for recycling is that just the knowledge of that end disposition becomes the prohibiting or challenging feature. In the same way that knowledge of the end disposition for any of the other ones becomes the challenge in the system as to who needs to know, how much do they need to know, that sort of thing. And I know under our recyclable material statutes, just that linkage between the generator and the subsequent recycler needs to be clearly established and that relationship clearly understood for it to really work. So I would say that you're right. I think that it kind of hits those same sort of roadblocks in the system that the other ones do.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that level of knowledge and the point of generation becomes the sticking point there.
Right.
Don't
But we do, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Oh no, finish that. Go.
I was just going to say, but we certainly think it's an important issue, has a lot of the same public interest considerations. We want to encourage these types of things. So we do think legislation should be pursued for this as well.
If not guidance.
If not guidance, right. So we would want, I don't know if we have consensus on that recommendation, but I think we do think it's an important issue to continue to discuss.
So just to clarify, your position is the retailers or the folks at the retail store don't have this information, but you have product that could potentially go for recycling, and you're moving that to the reverse distributor or whatever logistics facility to make that decision and make that recommendation whether to recycle it or not.
That's right. Just like for the same, for the other things, for donation or salvage or for, to make the credit determination, all of those decisions are made at the same point as to whether to recycle or whether to donate. Hopefully donate first, but if you can't, then recycle. So all of those decisions are made at the same point in time and have the same issues of, the reach back.
The ability to recycle, the ability to find someone who's willing to recycle, all of that.
And they have the volume.
Right. All of it rests upon having it accumulated and having it in a position to be able to be transferred in a way and at a time where that makes sense. But having it trickle individually from various locations prohibits or at least creates a block for recycling.
And then finding out after it's been recycled that, I should
is now exiting.
Labeled it ERM at the store.
Right.
I mean, that goes to Michael's point earlier, is that a lot of retailers just are not recycling, almost period. I mean, other than front end and easy stuff, it's just, nobody's making the hard decisions.
Correct. Whether it's due to confusion, concern, the conflict, or the conservatism, whatever. I mean, all of these things feed into it. I think the challenge here is how do we capture this such that the current state of play is, there is certain management occurring right now based on uncertainty and confusion and lack of information. So therefore, all of these recommendations kind of are attempting to break that roadblock and get to a point of use of this material in the way for which it's originally intended, or getting it to maximum use possible, but also then making sure that those things that truly are waste that are hazardous managed appropriately and effectively. Is that a fair statement?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if somebody wrote that down, you can put it in the.
Luckily, it's on tape. And in the context of waste minimization as well. So.
Yes. My only final, although I never have a final, the point that I would have to make on Medical Waste Management Act is I'm a bit concerned and reluctant to make this an advocacy piece for a particular piece of legislation. I think that's a bit risky, just in the sense that none of us know where, how, or why, and I think it's that, and to put it perfectly frankly, I can't advocate for enactment of a bill that I have not been given authorization to advocate for enactment. So you're putting me in a bind of not being able to sign up to this. I think it would be better to kind of cast it in more general terms and not specific vehicle terms.
Which is the same way, we should think of it as there's not actually a bill out there,
Right.
just the same way we thought of
Just
all
a
the
bill,
other ones.
you know,
It's
this-
a legislative
Suggest
fix.
a statutory change which would allow this.
Yeah. instead of
And
making
then
a bill.
it is possible for those who
Because it won't
understand
be
this.
adopted
to-
by the time it gets over to legislature and
Yeah,
Okay.
I just think genericizing.
So we can still advocate for the positions that are in AB 4514 without reference.
And actually that's,
Well, it's a recommendation, right?
right, and that's better anyway, because
Who knows what happens?
presumably it could even be amended, and then when
Right,
you
then
say
we might not like
514,
it.
what are you referring
Yeah,
to?
what-
anyway?
yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
a safer
Yep.
approach.
Okay.
That makes
Point
sense.
well taken.
Yeah, is it as of the date this is?
Yeah.
Right,
Right,
yeah.
Got it.
So I just want to go to page 11 where we talk about, it's a summary of issues and recommendations. This would be just a placeholder to try to capture some of this generic recommendation rather than each individual one. That was the concept behind this, so.
Is now exiting.
I just,
Do you mean in terms of a comprehensive
yes,
recommendation?
a comprehensive.
Well, again, I mean, we can play with format. Like I said, I was thinking, as I saw you kind of lay this out, this is more the executive summary area where everything is kind of synopsized. But then I would say in the recommendation section, that would be placed after all of the other individual recommendations, a comprehensive recommendation that could be offered that kind of deals with at least the ones that it can deal with.
All right.
So it won't deal with the aquatic toxicity testing. It won't deal with the empty container issue, but it will deal with, and again, specifying the ones that it deals with, for instance. So then that so you don't need to repeat it in each one. You can kind of have just a global one that deals with many of the issues simultaneously, for instance.
In terms of the types of recommendations, you mentioned the two. One was changing legislation, one was guidance. But given guidance isn't always enforceable, what about change of regulation, or is that a subset of change
Yeah,
of
and
legislation?
I think that comes in with the aquatic toxicity testing and the empty container, but
Yeah,
it could be
container's
other.
the perfect example.
Yeah, so a lot of this
Maybe
hinges on where the substantive requirement exists. Is it in statute or is it in regulation? If it's in regulation, clearly there's administrative authority and ability to do something there. If it's in statute, unless my regulation makes an existing statute more specific, I'm pretty much off limits to conflict or otherwise, be in conflict with the
Yeah,
statute.
and the empty was a perfect example. I don't think you can fix that necessarily.
Oh,
in
yeah, no,
guidance.
trust,
Yeah.
there are ways that they can be fixed in statute, I just don't, I'm not.
Yeah, and I don't think I
advocating
want to go statute. I think that's a regulatory fix, just a few words and some
yeah, and
regulations.
in that case, I think because there's a specific regulation on empty containers, I don't think guidance is gonna do it.
Right, no.
Right.
Yeah, so
That's where you're
we
gonna
have
be
the three
bound.
options.
Yeah, so, and again, I also wanna recommend that just saying statutory, there are many different types of statutory change which can be envisioned, which kind of bring in or have different features. So exemptions are one type, other sorts of conditional authorizations or other things. So again, as I look at statute, it is a kind of a robust and very dynamic body of information and directive that can be considered in a number of ways.
But for example, the empty container, that's a regulatory fix.
Regulation.
Do you need legislative authority, or do you have it now?
No.
So,
We had authority to adopt the regulation, we have authority to amend the regulation, unless there's something else that we lost a particular authority. For instance, there have been a number of regulations we've adopted, universal waste regulation, for instance. That authority to adopt universal waste regulation sunsetted in 2008, so our ability to change the body of universal waste regulation or add to it is limited.
Right.
Did I just hear a recommendation to go back to the legislature and get you that authority?
You did not. I am not advocating.
But that may be an
I
avenue.
was just providing an example of,
But that may be an avenue we can look at too.
No.
But that might be a viable avenue, is that you may need statutory authority to
Yes,
implement.
so to the extent we don't have authority to do a regulatory fix or change, that would be a way that legislation would come into play. In this particular instance, for those two items that we've identified, those are clearly within the purview of our current authority.
Okay, 5 minutes left, and we can talk about process, about next steps, how to get this done. Obviously, waiting till the 25th to go over the next comments is not going to work, so.
25th, we should preserve for fine tuning and any
That's the
finishing
party.
touches. And yes, and backslapping.
Margaritas.
And thank you. All right.
So I thought it was a very productive meeting in terms of getting the formatting and issues with that. And my apologies if I've thrown out some comments that led you, Michael, a little anxiety. Hopefully
No,
you
we're
understand
not.
them. No.
We like to exist.
But I'd be
Being
happy.
anxious is always a good thing.
So I'm thinking we may want to have a core team. That might be a more productive way to do some phone calls, or what was it, Skype for Business, or some other avenue where we could do some succinct ways of getting back with one another on comments rather than.
Well, I think that the first and primary objective is to get people's feedback. Because I mean, without that, any other meeting and discussion is a little bit unnecessary and foolhardy. But so I would say that anybody who considers themselves part of this working group needs to get feedback and specific text suggestions to us so we can consider it. Yes.
So some of those people are not listening to hear your plea.
So we are going to have to, we will send out a
So
note.
I'm wondering, and I'm even wondering, not to create work for DTSC, but is it appropriate to do a specific reach out to particular parties and just make it clear this is your last chance?
So we will,
want to do?
as I envision it, we will do two things. One, we will send out a general blast to the entire list of those who consider themselves members, trying to reiterate exactly what we just said, their need to speak up and offer suggestions to text and not just comments, but we need specifics now. And then secondly, we will reach out to specific persons who we believe
Who may be more engaged in just
or
there's a lot going
have,
on.
yes.
Yeah.
So to ensure that they're aware.
So is we having a deadline for comments before?
That's so yeah. So I was so Megan was kind of cutting to a later part of discussing the comments, but so the first step is we need people to get comments. So what is we need to discuss and decide on a deadline for those.
We currently have our last meeting set for May 25. Scott and I were going to suggest that if there were a way to do it May 24th and that worked for people, it would work better for both of us because we both have other commitments, but or at least I do.
Yeah, 24. We did the morning.
I was going to suggest the afternoon, but
I can't do the afternoon of the 24th. Sorry.
Clearly, they
let's deal with
communicated
that
before the meeting.
So, assuming we have a meeting on the 24th or 25th, when is the appropriate time for turnaround on comments so that we really, hopefully, that last meeting is a non-event? So we've all reached consensus.
Is now exiting.
Would getting everybody's feedback by the 19th give us enough time to turn around early the next week to hammer out wordsmith and have the meeting on the 24th, 25th?
From this Friday, yeah, that should be.
Next Friday, yeah.
That's more generous than I was going to suggest.
Yeah.
You want me to give you less? I'll give you less.
Well, and I think in the interim, that doesn't mean we wait till the 19th to make some of these changes we've talked about. There's going to be writing going on, but this would be the conclusion of any.
I think people should.
Yeah.
Can we move it up a couple of days?
Yeah.
Would you like the 17th?
So we can circulate a draft by like the following Monday, so we're not doing the last minute.
How about the 17th?
Yeah.
Deadline 17th for comments to us. I think we're going to try to be the keepers.
Is now exiting.
Because I'm chasing different drafts and different versions around is not my, so again, if you can get
so to
them.
make sure DTSC has everything they need by the 17th, and then do you think you guys could commit to sending out whatever you've collected by the 19th?
Well,
or I mean, are you thinking we won't need?
Well, again, to the extent
is now exiting.
Conflicting feedback, we're going to need to do some sort of vetting process to come up with some resolution to it, or at least to try to. Again, this is all hypothetical and conceptual and based only on experience with other documents that have been impossible to manage as well. To the extent that we get everybody kind of conforming or giving similar comments, and we can do our best to just try to meld it and it's not in a non-offensive way. If we get conflicting, if we get kind of feedback that basically can't peacefully coexist, we're going to have to procedurally come up with a way to get together and discuss, as Megan suggested, maybe as a small group to try to.
Well, doesn't that just go to these people said this and those people said
Yeah,
that?
well, again,
Hopefully, but
one method of resolution.
what I was wondering is if you could commit to posting everybody's comments when you get them, so that, because we're kind of out of time, and so that way you can be working. I guess what I'm afraid of is you're going to get overloaded with all these comments, and then we're going to get it's going to take you some time.
Is
to put
now
together.
exiting.
Whereas we can kind of also be working on a way to meld it at the same time you are, and then.
Then I feel like you have two.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think that way.
Two authors. What I hear you saying is you're going to put. Industry is going to like take the comments and put them in. DTSC might be
No,
taking
not
comments
necessarily.
and
We
putting
may
in.
just review the comments and talk with DTSC
talk
and
with-
say,
okay.
you know, here are some ideas for how to reconcile these. I think it's just more productive if we have more information sooner.
So
Yeah.
again, you're
I just want to make sure
I'm not
two
promising
people
to do it. I think we should probably get everything together and have a conversation about, and we might even divide it up. And you might say, we'll take this part, but I'm just afraid that it gets stuck in your lap, and we don't know what the comments are, and we just kind of lost time. So I think we should get them all together and then maybe have a call with maybe a smaller group about how are we going to deal with the 30 comments we got, or maybe we'll get 2 comments and it'll be easy.
So again, I would also suggest that those who really don't, I mean, if you're not ready to put pen to paper but just want to discuss, you know, your general feedback or suggestions, that I think that doesn't necessarily conform to this process of we can't post that which somebody just contacts us about to talk about it. So we're going to have, I'm trying to accommodate those who haven't put anything on paper to date and may not necessarily want to put anything on paper to date to at least express their comments and concerns. I would hope that we get written feedback.
Comments should go to our retail waste inbox. You have that information, Nina? The address for the retail waste?
retail@dtsc.ca.gov.
So I was just also wondering, should we comment on your draft? Should we comment on the prior draft?
I think that right now you just heard this was a very quick and dirty. So to the extent that Megan, or we intending to flesh this out more, and by
I would like an opportunity maybe to again get some feedback. Maybe we do a little wordsmithing because.
Well, again, I mean, there's some things that there's no words there yet to smith.
Yeah.
Right.
There was just the first initial outline, which smithing is not a.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure people are coming on the same document.
Okay.
So they comment on the clean version, and then we will work on addressing your comments?
I feel like we walked through this one.
Yeah.
Everybody has this one.
Okay.
Right? There's big buckets of questions. I don't know. I just feel like it makes
So let's
more sense to
all
work from
comment on
this
this one.
Yeah.
If,
So
if
do
you're
that,
redlining.
and if you have, you know, something of text that might be useful for filling in that initial contextual area, that would be helpful to just suggest it.
Yeah,
because
get it to you sooner than later.
Yeah.
Let me just integrate stuff that already
Wait,
exists.
so why don't we comment on this? Everyone submit their comments on this draft.
This version.
Comment on the document that was distributed today.
Okay.
And for those who did not get it, Matt will put it up on our website. So it will be dated 5/11.
Except that the document I see here is
Dated
working
5/2.
draft May 2nd.
Yeah, we'll change the date.
Change
That's
it
why I
to
mentioned 5/11. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, is that, so then we will, as of May 19th, we should be hopefully turning stuff around, and then that should give us time within the week after that's resolved. And did we resolve the day we're meeting?
No.
We can leave it where it is, and we'll figure it out.
Okay, so let
Get
us
back to
know.
you.
And,
Oh, except that.
okay. All right, well, I think we're done.
So the next meeting date is May 25th, 1:30 to 4. That will be the last meeting for this group.
Is now exiting.